Hello, everybody. I hope that you are doing well. Welcome to our August Back to Basics workshop. It's so great to see so many familiar faces and so many new ones. I'm seeing people pop in the check-in question in the chat already. But a massive, massive, massive welcome to everybody. I'm so glad that you could make it and that you've taken time out of your busy day to be a part of our workshop here at the African Climate Alliance. Today, have a pretty big workshop ahead of us. I'm not going to lie. But it is something that we need to address, something we need to talk about, because otherwise we'll never actually reach climate justice in our lifetime. Um, and so I'm absolutely honored to be facilitating and holding space today. My name is Gabriel. I'm from the African Climate Alliance, and I'll be your facilitator for today's Back to Basics workshop. As you all know, Tulu, who loves being here, unfortunately isn't here today because we have put them to rest a little bit. Go and sleep, relax. You've been doing a lot, and so actually we've decided let's just give you some time. However, I'm not alone. Today we will hear a keynote speaker. It's very new for a Back to Basics workshop, but we're trying to spice it up. Um, and so we have the amazing Laika Martin, who will be jumping in. Laika, do you want to pop your camera on just to wave at the people, just so that they know what they're getting later on? There you are. Cool. And so we'll have a bit of a keynote speech, kind of interjection, contribution from Laika in a little bit, and then some space for questions and more before we kind of co-create some solutions and answers together. So let me just share my screen because you know how I love to go about this. Before anything, actually, if you have any general questions around data reimbursement and, this is not the platform to raise them. If you want to raise them, you can email team@africanclimatealliance.org for general queries. For anything specific to education, if you have any follow-ups, how to get in touch with Laika and more, I'm sure she'll be happy to share her contact in the chat later on. But otherwise, email us at education@africanclimatealliance.org. And then for data reimbursement, we'll be sure to share the link in the chat near the end of today's workshop. As a reminder, you need to have at least attended 70% of the workshop, meaningfully engaged throughout the workshop, either through the chat or through the breakout rooms or more. It's on a rotational basis, meaning if you get data for this workshop, you won't get data for the Wednesday dialogue. If you don't get data for this workshop, you will get for that workshop. If that makes sense, it's a rotational basis. But then also on top of that, it's important to note you won't get data this week when you apply for data this week. We try our best to make sure that enough people have time to fill out the form before we close it, and then we begin processing the data. So you'll get it 7 business days. So you're not going to get it on Sunday because today's Monday. Don't email us on Sunday. We are sleeping on Sunday, or we're at church, or praying, or we're just relaxing. But just know that you will get it 7 business days from that. If not, an email will find you telling you and informing you about any delays or updates or progress. So admin aside, let's jump into today's session. I've seen some people already popping in the chat just how they're doing and more, but I want us to officially get kicked off into today's topic, into today's workshop. So as I said, welcome, welcome, welcome everybody to today's Back to Basics workshop. For those who don't know what a Back to Basics workshop is, so here at African Climate Alliance, we truly believe that everyone should be on the same page before we kick into it all. And so we try our best before we dive into these massive things and massive discussions to go back to the basics. It's important that we find ourselves where we are and that make sure that we support each other along our journey towards climate justice. We can't assume that everyone knows everything. And so our Back to Basics workshops really take a topic and go back to the basics of that topic. And then that's preparing us for the ACA dialogue, which is a dialogue that happens following the Back to Basics workshop. So today we have it on a Monday, and so we'll have the ACA dialogue on the Wednesday. And that's where we begin having a conversation with some of these individuals that we've highlighted within the space. And so today you get a bit of a cheeky kind of engagement where you get to hear a little bit from Laika and a bit about kind of where she's on with this journey, what it means to her, the topic of today's workshop and more. And so Back to Basics workshop today for August is understanding the African diaspora within the climate justice movement. And so today we hope to unpack a little bit about the content, the context and more. But please understand, today there can be so much more coming out of today's workshop. The context is so, it's so rich. And so if I don't talk about everything and you're like, hey, actually, I wish you would have spoken about that, email education@africanclimatealliance.org. And we can definitely try to see how we can use that, turn it into potentially a video resource or maybe a written resource that you can use while you activate and mobilize in your community. So jumping into today, as I mentioned, these concepts and ideas we are discussing can be workshopped on their own entirely. That's how rich and thick and busy they are. But we only have a limited time on our hands today. And so we're going to try our best to kind of go back to the basics while compacting the information at hand. And so a check-in question for today, your name, your country, and what does solidarity within the climate justice movement mean or look like to you? So my name is Gabriel. I'm calling from South Africa. I'm living in South Africa and I was born in South Africa. And so for me, that's who I am. And for me, solidarity within the climate justice movement means seeing each other and understanding each other when we see each other. So that's what it means like for me, just personally, that's what it means to me. And so, yeah, I'm seeing in the chat some people already popping in their check-ins. I'm going to read a few, but if anyone would like to jump in with their mic, please do raise your hand. We are excited to hear from you. I'm seeing someone say solidarity within the climate justice space means supportive and uniting to achieve a common cause. I'm loving that. I'm seeing Ayub from Kenya saying solidarity in the climate justice means coming together for changes and engaging each other in climate, on the topic of climate change. I'm seeing Taiji from South Africa saying, hello, solidarity looks like sharing knowledge, listening and supporting each other. I'm loving that. I'm loving that. I'm seeing Veronica from Kenya saying solidarity looks like and means people or organizations, even government at large, coming together to support climate justice. Joy from Kenya saying solidarity in climate change means coming together for changes in the space. Pauline from Kenya saying solidarity is a game changer in the climate justice space. I'm loving that. But before we move on, would anyone like to unmute and share what they believe? Or do a bit of a check-in for themselves, not just share what they believe. But yeah, does anyone like to jump in? Serge, go for it.
All right, thank you. My name is Serge Banda from Malawi. Yeah, sobriety in the climate justice, as I can say, right, it's like it means amplifying the voices and stories of those most affected by climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm loving the fact that we've gone to the word amplifying, not, using the voice and speaking on behalf of, because that's not solidarity. Solidarity is amplifying those voices from those most affected. So thank you so much for that, Serge. Can we get some love in the chat for Serge? Some emojis, some reactions, guys. Serge was brave and Serge has put his mic on and everything. And so some love, some love, some love. Amazing. Would anyone else like to unmute and share what they believe, or who they are, their country, and what they believe solidarity looks like or means to them? No? Cool. Just checking one more time. No, no, no. Okay. If at any point you want to share your feelings on the topic or the check-in, we have a breakout room later on where we can definitely discuss it a little bit more. But we will also be diving into that topic through today's session as well. I'm going to take a moment to quickly read another check-in or two in the chat. I'm seeing Rakita saying, hello, solidarity means coming together for a common good. I'm seeing Masego from South Africa saying solidarity within climate justice space refers to approaching every climate justice issue that we mentally, that with a we mentality. I'm loving that. Sorry, I'm almost misread you there, Masego. With a we mentality, not an I mentality or a you mentality, but a we mentality, and working towards a greater good. Samson from Malawi saying solidarity means working on the same aim. Amazing. Keep it going, guys. Keep it going. But let me just stop sharing for a quick second to make sure that I've got the correct presentation before I start showing something completely incorrectly. I do have the right presentation. Oof. Okay. So today, before we jump further, I'm going to share just some rules of engagement and a bit more. There we are. So please raise your hand if you want to ask a question or add a contribution. If you don't have a hand and you want to just pop it in the chat, you're more than welcome to. You can either say, I can't find the raise function, so I can either put my question in the chat, or you can put a little star in the chat, or you can say, I have a question in the chat. But that's how you can let us know if you'd like to verbally communicate or if you'd like to communicate via the chat. We practice the rule of two. The way that we do the rule of two here at African Climate Alliance is two people speak after you've spoken before you speak again. And so, for example, if I'm wah right now, then what I will do is I'll pass to someone else to speak. Now, for example, someone else will start having their part. Then another person jumps in, and then I speak again. That way we make sure that our value, our contributions and our various opinions are kind of commonly shared rather than one person dominating the entire space. The only person who will not be practicing the rule of two is me, because as your facilitator, my job is to gap. And so I am very excited about kind of diving into this conversation with you. If at any point you notice that no one else is speaking after you've just spoken, then you can go again, even if no one else has spoken. So that is the rule of two. I'm seeing in the chat Donald from Zambia saying, solidarity means amplifying voices, participation of the marginalized group in the climate sector. And Siyabonga saying, solidarity for me is coming together to tackle climate justice issues. I'm loving this. I'm loving this. These are such rich contributions that add to our common understanding. Feel free to use your home language. The hope is that we can have someone who in the room who can translate. We do use English as the primary language of communication in this space because there's so many different languages across the African continent. And so we do use English as the primary language. However, hopefully there is someone in this room who's able to translate for you. Otherwise, you can pop your contribution in the chat in your mother tongue, and we will use good old Google Translate to support us in understanding what you're saying. The hope is that in the future, we are able to really have a space where we have different translators in this space. But for today, we are going to be using English as our primary language of communication. And then lastly, you're more than welcome to use the chat throughout the day if you feel uncomfortable to verbalize any of your points. But we do want to see you engaging. Awesome. So, understanding the African diaspora. So diaspora, I might change the way I say it, depending on how I'm feeling, within the climate justice movement. So context, this month we are exploring what solidarity looks like between people of African descent from across the globe. In today's workshop, we will dive deeper in understanding the African diaspora within the climate justice movement. We'll unpack key concepts such as African diaspora. We'll be unpacking the making of the African diaspora and the role of the African diaspora playing in climate justice, but also how the continent can play a role in supporting the diaspora. And so just keep that in mind, is that it's not what you can do as the diaspora, but rather what we can do and what this relationship needs to look like going forward. The hope is that the conversation is going to set out how solidarity between the continent and the diaspora looks like, and how we can together elevate the plight and the fight for African youth. And so just a reminder, it's not all about the sad things. It's about how we can build solidarity for justice and change together. Awesome. So what is African diaspora. What is the African diaspora? Well, it's made up of communities and individuals of African descent that live outside of the African continent. These groups and individuals move out of the continent for various reasons. It's very important to remember that. Some may still have ties with the continent as they are maybe first generation. So people who just moved out and, or, maybe their families moved there when they were very young. And so they still have connections and deep kind of relation with family or friends or more. And then there's others who moved out of the continent and have that distant relationship to the continent for many generations. So what qualifies being part of the African diaspora? So it's important to remember, we said it's communities and individuals of African descent that live outside the continent, groups that have moved out for various reasons, some more recently and some who have more of a historic relationship to the continent. When we talk about who qualifies, quote unquote, this is also something we'll bring up later. It's people of African descent, African immigrant and migrant communities, and African students and workers abroad. And so when we talk about this, it's important to acknowledge that there's many different groupings that we're talking about. Even the point of people of African descent, that's something of high contention right now and over the last few years. And so we'll get a little bit more into that a bit later on. African immigrant and migrant communities as well, and individuals, and then African students and workers abroad. And so hopefully we just kind of are readying ourselves to dive into a little bit of that later on. So that's what makes up or what the African diaspora is. So the making of the diaspora. In order for us to understand what the African diaspora is, we must look at how it is made up. There are two ways in which the African diaspora is made up, namely voluntary diaspora and involuntary diaspora. This is very important to remember because it's different circumstances. Oh, and before we go further, because it's different circumstances, it's important to acknowledge that there's different ways in which we have to acknowledge change, acknowledge responsibility, and acknowledge how solidarity needs to look. For example, solidarity with voluntary diaspora may look very differently as it relates to solidarity with involuntary diaspora. So what is the voluntary diaspora? Well, these are people who form part of the voluntary diaspora are people who have left the continent voluntarily. They have left their home country in search of better living situations or career opportunities. And so sometimes it's like, oh, I need to leave because I'm not really liking what's going on. So I'm moving, I'm going because there's an education or a working opportunity for me elsewhere. And so I'm going to be moving out of the continent or out of this region or space. And so it's very important for us to remember that's what the voluntary diaspora is. The involuntary diaspora, people who form part of this diaspora are people or individuals who did not leave the continent voluntarily. They were forced to do things and move through because of things they cannot control. Various reasons such as war, persecution, natural disasters, or economic hardship. And so we see different circumstances and situations like that, like this, for example, right now, where we know at least someone here knows someone who's moved off of the continent because of education purposes or because of work opportunities or more, or because they want to live somewhere else or move somewhere else. And so it's very important for us to acknowledge this. Whereas we also all know, either we all know someone or we've heard or read things that happened here within the involuntary diaspora, or someone who's engaged who's had to move because they've been forced to without their control. And so various reasons such as war, persecution, natural disasters, and economic hardship. There's also an historic relationship when it comes to involuntary diaspora, such as colonization and more. And so it's very important for us to remember a little bit of that from the previous workshop. And so please feel free to check out the previous workshops that we've done on colonization, capitalism, and more, and how they are underpinning systems of the climate crisis and how they worsen the climate crisis. So check that out. But this is important to remember. These are two different diasporas. So now we've learned what the diaspora is and the two kind of major groupings that make up the diaspora. The relationship between. Before we go here, I just want to read in the chat quickly. I'm seeing Keta from Zambia saying solidarity means strengthening togetherness of voices, of different voices, but with similar perspectives aimed at managing climate change. And then I'm seeing also Mboya sharing a few things about amplifying voices, about looking at intersectionality and then global cooperation. Well done, amazing, amazing, amazing. So, like I said, we've learned what the diaspora is. We've learned that it's communities and individuals of African descent that live outside the continent. That then these groups or individuals moving out of the continent for various reasons, and those various reasons being voluntary or involuntary. And we've understood what those two things mean now. So the relationship between the African diaspora and between Africa and the diaspora. Historically, the relationship between Africa and the diaspora has been one of mutual support and aid. The seen in actioning solidarity and struggling and supporting the struggle efforts in Africa. And so oftentimes we see groups who have gone through different movements and pushes, really jumping in and supporting and standing in solidarity and showing resistance in a global capacity. It wasn't through, for example, it wasn't through simply the fight of South Africans that we beat apartheid or we made our way out of apartheid. It was through the support of those within the continent as well as those within the diaspora. And so it's very important for us to acknowledge that actioning solidarity and support and supporting struggle efforts in Africa has been a massive area that we've seen the relationship engage through advocacy and policy building on foreign affairs and international affairs. And so we've seen that relationship begin to unpack. We also begin to see it unpacking now even more as our different countries are engaging in conversations around, trade, around what it means to travel, what it means to collaborate, what it means to engage with one another. Then we've seen it through active participation in international relations, as well as being safe spaces for one another. And so these are just a few of the ways in which we see the relationship between Africa and the diaspora. And so it's through support, it's through aid, it's through collaboration, it's through relationship building, it's through a network, a solidarity network, so to speak, solidarity looking a bit rough at the moment. And so it's very important for us to acknowledge that this has been historically something that we've seen, but it's also something that we continue to see and continue to do, in addition to so many more roles that still have yet to be discussed. And so the relationship between Africa and the diaspora historically has been one of actioning solidarity and support within our struggle efforts. We've seen it during the I think it was the 2020 slash 2021 kind of push, not the kind of start, but the push around Black Lives Matter in the US. We see it right now with the vicious attacks on different communities in the UK, different communities who are of African descent. And so we're starting to see that global solidarity and supporting the struggling efforts. We see it through advocacy and policy building in foreign affairs, international relations, and then also we see it in being safe spaces. Now, safe spaces doesn't just mean I am safe, I am here. That's not what a safe space looks like. That is sometimes what it is, but sometimes it's through being able to just share and communicate and just express self without worry of repercussion. It's about being able to complain and just rant about the issues and injustices we're facing. It's also being able to stand with someone and welcome them into your home, so to speak, and say, cool, I am now your family. You're alone here. I am your family. I am your friend. I am your support system. How can I help? And we begin to see that happen as well. And so that's what the relationship is between the diaspora and Africa. Or is it? Because right now, it's essential to note that whilst the relationship still exists today, there are many growing tensions. These tensions are seen through Afrophobia. And I say Afrophobia because it's not xenophobia. In South Africa, for example, right now, many people may be saying, oh, there's a lot of xenophobia. Yes, there is. But there's also, let's focus more. There's a lot of Afrophobia, and we're seeing that. We're seeing the way in which many people in South Africa happily are not complaining, maybe not happily, but aren't complaining or aren't saying, why is this person from the US, this white American person coming to South Africa? Why are these what are they called? The digital nomads, why are they coming? We're not hearing that. However, what we are hearing is a lot of Afrophobia against Nigerians, against Sudanese people, against Malawians, against Zimbabweans. We're seeing that flourish. But where we also see it is it popping up in areas of the diaspora as well, where there's a lot of racism, internalized racism, where there's a lot of stigma, where there's a lot of bias that is pushed out when people from the African continent go and live in the different spaces that maybe have historically had a different upbringing, context, and more. This scene when we sometimes see African Americans, not understand fully the context in which people in Africa live. Sometimes you hear, "Oh, you live there, do this, you ride zebras, you do that." Like, no, we've got communities and we've got cities, and not just big cities, but we've got communities that, yes, I live in a mud hut, but guess what? That's how I live, and I'm living happily. And so it's about how do we decolonize our mindset within that? So Afrophobia looking very differently in different spaces as well. We also see it through the tensions through the oppression Olympics. I am suffering more than you are suffering. So your problem is not my problem. Only I suffer. Your suffering isn't real. Yes. Maybe, for example, and apologies for the example, you've lost your leg and I've hurt my leg. Your issue is more severe. I am still allowed, however, to complain about my leg being injured. And so it's about acknowledging that whilst there is a kind of hierarchy in a way of how badly someone is experiencing something, people still do experience these injustices and these issues that we're facing. For example, when we talk about who will experience the climate crisis the most, we know it will be those in Africa. And so it's very important for us to acknowledge that whereas maybe those within the African diaspora will not experience those injustices as severely yet. But as progress happens, as we know, as climate crisis worsens, we will begin to see that rolling out. Degradation of each other's lived experiences and challenges. I've spoken about this now. And then disagreements on what counts or who counts as part of the diaspora. No, you don't count as the diaspora. Technically, you don't count, because if you did count, you would truly understand this. And actually, it's only first generation immigrants, and it's not this, it's not that, and there's a lot of tension and contention around that. And so it's very important for us to acknowledge that when we talk about the relationship between Africa and the diaspora, we talk about the good, the historically good, the current good, but also we talk about the historic bad and the current bad, and how these historical issues and tensions still currently exist, and more work to build true solidarity needs to be discussed. This will be a process of unlearning and relearning. And so I think you've heard me yap enough. Please do me the favor, everybody, just so we can hear a little bit more of an example of kind of what the topic is about today. In welcoming our keynote speaker for today, Laika Martin. Laika, thank you so much for being here. Laika is a youth development practitioner and sustainable development advocate from Cape Town, South Africa. She's currently the Africa Matters Ambassador Program Lead for Africa Matters Initiative. In this role, she focuses on coordinating leadership development training, mentorship programs, and youth-led enterprise creation and development across Africa. With a BSc in applied biology from UCT and a keen interest in systems thinking and climate action, I can attest there's definitely systems thinking and climate action. She seeks to our interdependence with nature as a driver of socio-economic development. Her climate action work includes serving as National Project and Policy Declaration Lead for the South African Youth Climate Action Plan. the country's first youth climate policy document. And so this is just a little bit about Laika. Laika, please feel free, because I know you've got a bountiful amount of expertise and more. Go for it. We look forward to hearing a little bit about just more around this topic as we understand the African diaspora and more. So yeah, maybe start off by sharing where you're from and where you currently are, and then more. Cool.
Great. Thank you so much, Gabriel, for that wonderful introduction. I love the energy of this entire session, not only just from you as a facilitator, but also in the chat and the keen interest in this particular conversation. So I'm very, very happy to be here with you all this evening. So yes, just a bit of more info into me. So as mentioned, I'm Laika Martin. I am born, raised, and have always resided in the lovely Cape Town, South Africa. And this conversation around African identity has been something that was sparked within me when I started to engage more with climate advocacy, and then branched off into trying to focus more on youth development, specifically within the African context, within my role with Africa Matters initiative. So understanding what makes one African and how does one connect with both the continent and those outside of it has been part of my unlearning and relearning process for the last few years. So as mentioned, I also have a very keen background in climate advocacy, climate action and climate awareness from a science point of view, and then branching off into the space of climate advocacy from a policy implementation point of view. So that has been something that I've been trying to piece all the little pieces together through that work in climate advocacy, and then placing it in the context of Africa and placing it in the context of localized action as well. So I'm very, very happy to be here this evening to just kind of shed a bit of light into the work that I do, the work that the organization that I'm with does, as well as just kind of shed a bit of light into this conversation around the African diaspora and the role that it plays within African climate justice movement. And just, this whole conversation of, solidarity. So I think actually to start off, before I go into just some of the conversations for my bit, is the check-in question of what does solidarity mean or look like to you? And I am going to answer it as a spoiler for what I'm about to say in my section, but it is something that you will see come through towards the end, is that solidarity for me really stems from the space of connection. For me, it means connection. It's the action or the result of connection. And connection allows one to see each other and see others. And in this conversation of the African diaspora, I think that aspect of seeing other people and seeing oneself reflected in them, the result of that is solidarity. So I think that for me is 100% my answer to the check-in question, but is quite honestly the running thread throughout my little bit that I will be sharing with you all this evening. Also, just a little bit of a note, if there are any background noises, if there are any sounds, I live in a community where it is never quiet. So that is just the hustle and bustle of things. So if it does create any sort of distraction, just let me know. Okay. So just to give you a bit of background into Africa Matters initiative and where we fit into this conversation around the African diaspora specifically. So the Africa Matters initiative is an NPO that is based in South Africa, but we have a global team that is located both within and outside of the African continent. And as an organization, we really do focus on upskilling and empowering African youth in the areas of leadership, advocacy, social entrepreneurship, as well as also community engagement. So the program that I lead, which is the Africa Matters Ambassadors Program, it is one of the flagship programs that really focuses on facilitating leadership development for African youth and also creating community-based initiatives within numerous African communities. But this next section is quite honestly, there's going to be the bits and pieces that you'll actually see towards the latter bit of my speech this evening, is that within our organization, we believe in African solutions that are spearheaded by African youth that prioritize localized action and bottom-up approaches to innovation. So not something that you get from a higher up, from a government, etc., but starting action where you are, starting action within your community and using that to drive forward development within your communities and at large the continent, right? And there's also this prioritization in our work that focuses on, prioritizing the potential of non-traditional leaders, because everyone, like, there is a perception of who a leader can be, right? But there is, quite honestly, that kind of traditional archetype of what a leader can be. We don't look for that. We're not looking for the accolades. We're looking for the people that are doing the work, okay? And we use that kind of narrative to really shape one's own narrative of change on the continent and trying to see people to serve as pillars of sustainable action. So what does all of this have to do with this conversation around the African diaspora? So key things that I would love to touch on is definitely touching a bit on this conversation of African solutions. What does it mean and who's involved in that process of African solutions and creating it, right? But then also this concept of owning one's narrative for change. So who drives that narrative? And when we're speaking about the African diaspora and this kind of conversation between those outside of the continent versus those inside the continent, who drives what narrative? Okay, so that is definitely going to be some of the key things that I'll be touching on. And hopefully it is, some light is shed on that towards the end. I'm just going to drink some water. Okay, cool. So I was asked to chat about what does the African diaspora mean to me? And I was sitting with this question because as someone who resides on the continent and does not have the experience of being outside of it, I only have that kind of concept or that understanding of being on the continent and existing within its context, right? So this required me to actually, delve into our team and to actually ask a few questions in terms of what this conversation of the African diaspora means, especially as a global team. How do we kind of think about it as well? So I think my understanding, as Gabriel has mentioned at the beginning, is first from a very technical point of view. So I understand it from its general definition as, people that, reside outside of the continent through multiple factors. So they have this connection, this ancestral connection or tie to the continent, but have migrated outside of the continent due to a multitude of reasons, as Gabriel mentioned, some historical and not so historical, factors, some that are related to, socioeconomic factors, and some within the context of climate change, climate migration and the role that climate impacts or climate change impacts has on people's decisions to actually not necessarily voluntarily, but involuntarily move outside of the country and even the continent in search of refuge, right? So all of these things for me has resulted in the establishment of whole communities of Africans and African descendants that are scattered across the continent, but have irrevocable ties to the continent. But outside of this general understanding of the African diaspora, when I'm also asked to think about it a bit more, my brain starts to think about it from I would say as an onion, peeling down those layers. And outside of that surface level definition of what the African diaspora is, my brain is thinking about a bit more deeper about what does it mean to be part of this particular community that is not tied physically to this continent, but has ties that shift and change and may differ across different communities. So when I'm thinking about it from the what it exactly means to me, beyond just who makes up the African diaspora, as Gabriel has mentioned, I need to recognize the challenges that comes from this migrationary kind of process and the role that it plays with identity, with connection, with, understanding. And when we speak about intersectional climate action and the African justice movement, these concepts of identity and connection are very important to consider. So when I think about the African diaspora, I'm actually, prompted by a particular excerpt. So there's a Nigerian poet, and I do ask that, anyone can help me pronounce this correctly. I'll put her name in the chat. So it's Ijeoma Umebinyo. So she is a Nigerian poet who published her debut collection of poetry called The Questions for Ada in 2015. And there's an excerpt in that particular book with the poem Diaspora Blues. And I think it sums up my personal feelings about what is the African diaspora. So it is as follows. So here you are, too foreign for home, too foreign for here, and never enough for both. So that is something that really stuck with me, is because there's a level of fragmentation that's happening right here when I think about the African diaspora. That particular excerpt really highlights a great fragmentation within the African population for me, between African nationals and the African diaspora, and the gaps that such sort of fragmentation causes in this concept of identity and understanding and efforts of connection, right? So when we foster any type of movement, but particularly one that is embedded in these principles of justice and equity and intersectionality, we can really see that a climate justice movement that is devoid of addressing this very active dissonance between groups really prevents a unification of efforts, right? So this makes it very difficult to translate ideas or to transfer knowledge or to collectively mobilize for change if this rift continues to exist. Those challenges that Gabriel mentioned before, such as, Afrophobia, or kind of understanding who belongs where, these all create these rifts and these kind of, continued gaps when we're trying to think of how to connect all of this stuff to create cohesive movements, right? So that's my general understanding or my feelings towards the African diaspora. And I hope that there are some in the chat. I will definitely see after this if there are some that actually resonate with that kind of emotion as well. But to kind of move into this conversation of, what role does the African diaspora really play within the African justice movement, and how can it be actualized? So if we kind of think about the African diaspora from this point of view of connection, if connection, right, is the answer for addressing fragmentation, then how do we facilitate connection, right? How does one use it to help move forward movements, especially that of the climate justice movement or the African climate justice movement, right? And I think that one vital commonality that we shouldn't dismiss or forget when it comes to these groups of African nationals, those that are based on the continent and the African diaspora, that fosters connection. One commonality that we have is the value of experiences that we have. We might have different experiences, but they are experiences that we have. And with experience comes knowledge, right? And that's a very vital commonality when it comes to really trying to build the movements and solidarity with different groups. So in this context of, how do we kind of, build these movements together? So I think from first and foremost, from the African nationals point of view, so I'm going to break them apart because in my mind, that just makes a bit more sense to kind of think about them. So from this point of view, what does, solidarity look like, or how can it be achieved within the African justice movement? So from an African nationals point of view, those of us who reside on the continent, we have first-hand experience with the lived realities of climate change and its impacts. And we also have first-hand experiences of the crucial areas of adaptation and innovation that is needed to drive forward climate resiliency and justice on the continent. So this also paired with our knowledge of our cultural and our socio-economic nuances that others who might be outside of the continent might fail to recognize in engagement. This brings a very unique perspective to change that informs movement building. But with anything that you have, you also have a level of responsibility. So those of us in the room that have knowledge, it's your responsibility to share that, right? So with this conversation of having that lived experience and wanting to kind of move forward, kind of solidarity movements, right? The responsibility that comes with having that first-hand knowledge is also in creating space for constructive dialogue and collaboration. So as an organization that focuses on promoting African, transformation and development, etc., we discussed also our role that we play in creating learning experiences for the exchange of knowledge and stories to help connect the African diaspora to African nationals. And we realized that as an organization, this is actually a gap in a lot of our offerings in creating constructive spaces for sharing knowledge, sharing ideas, creating space for co-development and collaboration. So with this in mind, and I speak about movement building oftentimes from the local level, from the in your communities, within your little spaces, it's very important that with those types of movement building that start from the ground up, you need collaborators. You need people to help you along the way. So when we think about the African diaspora as collaborators in helping us to move forward movements or to create movements, it's very important for us to be cognizant of the fact that we need to create space for knowledge exchange, right? So that's the first thing that I think about when I think about ways that we can move forward and the role the African diaspora plays is that value of knowledge and experience that we as African nationals have on the ground can be a great ground for open and safe spaces and exchange as well. Then from the perspective of the African diaspora, right, particularly those residing in, the more developed nations or the global north, right, there exists an opportunity for alternative approaches to movement building and also access to resources and support networks that can at times be withheld from, global South countries, particularly within the African, space and the African continent. So, the whole group of the African diaspora actually serves as a great source of innovation as well. But the risk that comes with this conversation, it ties back to this conversation of African solutions for Africans by Africans. That's oftentimes a phrase that is used. So how within an African justice movement do we prevent a kind of shifting of a narrative or experience that might misrepresent a lived reality, right? So how do we maintain authenticity, but also welcome differences and foster connection within such a fragmented conversation? So at the most foundational level, right, it ties to this kind of point of creating space for critical dialogue. So how do we prevent a narrative from being, shaped that is not authentic to a lived experience? Having dialogue does that. But at a more higher level, sometimes what we can see happen is that there's sometimes something that's called the South-South and triangular cooperation, where you see development cooperation between global South partners with the support of a Northern partner or from someone outside. So quite honestly, when we think about it in this framework, one can see how the African diaspora really serves as a crucial pillar of support in the African justice movement without dictating narratives, but still crucially informing them as well. So I think in conclusion, for me personally, any movement is only as powerful as how unified and organized its objectives, its structure and implementation is. And the success of, any African justice movement really hinges on our ability to connect and to find commonalities to foster this connection. So an African justice movement for me that is absent of intersectionality is not just. An African justice movement without collaboration is not inclusive. And an African justice movement without the African diaspora is an incomplete puzzle, and it strips the movement from the beauty of cohesion as well. So I hope that that helps to kind of shape some of the conversation, to let us, have some nice dialogue, and that it helps open up the space for the other dialogues that you will have in your week as well. Open for any questions, any kind of contributions. But yeah, that is all from me.
A massive, massive, massive warm thank you, Laika. I think you've really, I mean, you never see this chat so quiet. I think you had them on the edge of their seats. Some love, everybody, for Laika's contributions today. I think it's really helped contextualize the conversation that we're having today, but also preparing us for the discussion that we'll be having um, on Wednesday. I think it's brilliant, actually, that the conversation is one that forced you almost to have a deeper conversation with your colleagues, because it's kind of what we're doing right now, is having a conversation with people in Africa before we hear about the experiences from those within the diaspora. And so a massive, massive thank you. I think we've got time for like one or two pressing questions for Laika before we continue, and then anything else that comes from it goes forward. But I just wanted to share that I'm really grateful that you've mentioned this idea of connection and community, and I think that's such a beautiful principle, because it's so simple. And to its core, it's so simple, but I think in practice, let's hope it becomes as simple going forward. But yeah, does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask Laika? Donald, I saw your mic. Lisa, Masejo, Ayub, Meshak, anyone? I see Lisa saying everything is clear. Hey, sometimes silence is the best proof that you've done your job. And so amazing. Cool. I'm giving it one more second to see if anyone has anything before we continue with today's session. No? Cool. Okay, everything is clear. Awesome. So once again, a massive thank you, Laika. In the chat, you can find out more about Africa Matters Initiative. Please go and check it out. Please go and give them some love on their social media, on the other platforms. Sign up to their newsletters and more. I think it's absolutely amazing the work that they do. And as you've all heard, I believe you will all think it's absolute amazing work as well. Laika, if anyone has any questions or anyone would like to get a hold of you, if you feel comfortable putting an email there or a LinkedIn or something, you're more than welcome to. If you're like, I'm scared to be bombarded, let me know. And I'd rather take the questions through the education channel. But
Please bombard me. I'm literally ready. I'm ready. So I'll share that in the chat. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing and contributing to today's discussion and knowledge building. Amazing. So we're going to continue with today's session. Let me get the presentation back on the screen. There we go. And then we're going to go into a quick breakout just for any initial thoughts, discussions, and more. Yeah, that was a keynote, a two-note. And so massive, massive thank you for that, Laika. And for anyone who wants to rewatch what was being said today, we'll make sure to post the Back to Basics workshop as normal and circulate that link so we can hear the rich contributions that we've heard today. So I won't dialogue it even further. I think we've heard quite a bit already from Laika, but just to kind of show you some of the visible points that were mentioned: Africa, the diaspora, the climate crisis. The climate crisis will no doubt exacerbate both the voluntary and involuntary diaspora. Involuntary a bit more due to a forced migration due to worsening climate circumstances within the climate crisis. And so we start seeing as community.
Bye.
Oh, someone's very excited. Amazing. As we see more communities and more individuals kind of be affected by the climate crisis, we will start seeing involuntary diaspora continue to grow. This was mentioned by Laika through climate refugees, climate, migration and more. Whereas voluntary, some regions may become less desirable to live in, so those either who can or want to seek different places of living or conditions because of extreme weather conditions or weather patterns may move. It is because of this that we need more communities of care, of practice, of solidarity to form between those on the continent and the diaspora, each being willing to share their experiences without fear and listen without judgment. And so I think it was quite on the nose. For those who don't know, Laika and I did not meet before today's discussion to plan this. So it's really cool to see that the points are touching on each other. And then it is also through this that we may see those living in the context leading on their experiences of the disproportionate effects that they face, foreign affairs and international relation policies that speak to the issues that we experience, a strengthened force of solidarity and resilience being built, access to resources and support structures that others may not have, a wider network for African voices, and deepening sense of belonging and connection to the injustices we experience, but more importantly, a sense of joint responsibility to educate, to advocate, and act for Afrocentric climate justice. I didn't put Afrocentric there, but it's always implied when it comes to ACA. So let's jump into the breakaways. We're going to put you into small groups. Please find someone who's willing to report back or to share just immediate thoughts. It doesn't have to be a long feedback. It's more for you guys to continue discussion. How can we build, how can we ignore that being it's how can we build stronger solidarity between Africa and the diaspora? And so we can talk about how that looks like. So what must the diaspora do versus what must Africa do? How can we begin to build those communities of care, that connection and more? And so how do we build solidarity between Africa and the diaspora? What role must the diaspora play? What role must Africa play? And how do we build that together? So I'm putting you all into breakout rooms, and we're going to give you about 10 minutes just for a light discussion for anyone who wants to share anything that they thought that came from Laika's presentation, anything that came forward, any points that you want to add forward about building those communities, building that connection and more. And so I'm going to put you all in the breakout rooms quickly. There we go. And we won't hear from every single breakout room, but just anyone who wants to share after today. And then go from there. Laika, you're more than welcome to remain within the call and join the breakout room. You're also more than welcome to jump off, up to you entirely.
You cannot get rid of me that easily. I will be here until the end.
Awesome. I'll make sure to put you in. Cool. If there's silence in your breakout rooms, know that I will find out, and then we'll have deep state conversations. But feel free to use the chat in your breakout room. Also feel free to just push through the barrier of hesitance. So how do we build solidarity between the diaspora and Africa? So I'm going to open those breakout rooms now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There we go. Create. The rooms are open now, and I hope to see you all soon. Welcome back, welcome back. I see people starting to slowly trickle in. That is amazing. I know some of you didn't get a chance to share, but that's okay. I think hopefully you were ruminating on it. You're thinking about it. It's building up here, it's sitting up here because the conversation continues on Wednesday. And I'll repeat all of this again when everyone's back in the room. But for those who are joining in slowly, welcome back, welcome back. Today we had such a great crowd, such a energetic group. So I'm super glad to see that. You've all stayed around, but also more importantly, that you're also willing to learn and build your knowledge and capacity. In the kind of breakout period, I was having a conversation with Laika, and we, I think, share the same sentiment that we hope that today has inspired you to continue doing your own learning and relearning. As we mentioned, the topic is so vast that we can only share so much. But I want to just see before we continue, does anyone have any immediate things that they'd like to share that came out of their breakout room. Anyone? Anyone? Any thoughts? Any emerging stuff? Asejo, go for it.
Good evening, everyone. I hope that you all doing well. So these are the points that we mentioned from our breakout session. So we specifically mentioned that we can build solidarity by working towards a common goal through open communication, collaboration, and supporting one another. And it's also vital to go back to grassroots. With that being said, building or developing local hubs within our communities. And in this regard, we will be able to take more action, start developing activities within local communities, and also use social media as a tool to join other global communities, because social media is a powerful tool for raising awareness. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the contribution, Masejo, from your group. I think it adds like just a nice kind of packaged bow of the contributions from your group. Would anyone else want to share maybe 2 more contributions from the space? Anyone else? Serge.
Yeah. In our group 4, we discussed some of the point how we can build a solidarity between Africa and the Diaspora. The first point was cultural exchange programs, something like encouraging people-to-people exchange, culture festivals, and artistic collaborations, and also discussed like education and knowledge sharing, in which establishing like scholarship programs, online courses, and knowledge sharing initiatives. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you for that, Serge. And I love the fact that we've added about sharing knowledge. We brought it back to that point, sharing initiatives, sharing knowledge, sharing contributions, and more. And so obviously there's a lot more that you said there, but also I'm just loving that we're bringing it back to that as well. Amazing. Lisa Kanya.
I'm so sorry. I was speaking and I thought my mic was on. So basically, my group and I were literally about like warming up a little bit and then trying to like get into it. These are the points that we came with. We thought maybe like building solidarity between Africa and the diaspora in the climate space requires a lot of collaboration with different roles from both parties. So looking into Africa, its role is to share local climate knowledge, engage diaspora experts, collaborate on research and innovation. And then the roles for the diaspora is to support climate advocacy and policy, as I somehow feel like the Africa has very much experience with like adaptation plans and ways forward. And then the diaspora to share expertise and skills, facilitate access to climate finance. And then mutual roles is to co-develop climate projects and to establish a knowledge sharing platform, collaborate on education and awareness. And then one of my group members noted that capacitating rural villages through information dissemination, sustainable infrastructure development, and community participation can reduce migration due to resource scarcity. Together, both Africa and the diaspora, they can enhance climate resilience, promote global climate justice, support sustainable development, and strengthen African climate leadership. And also, which is one of the most important factors as well, is to build a united front against global climate challenges. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Lisa Kanya, and for your group. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. Such rich contributions. And yeah, I just think it's so brilliant that we are able to see and hear that these are some of the reflections coming out of the space. Does anyone else, one more person, no one else? All good? All good? All good? No one else? Okay, cool. So think about what we've spoken about here today. We've spoken about what the diaspora is. We've spoken about the different types of diaspora, or what's created the different types of, diaspora, how the diaspora is made up. We've spoken a little bit about how we can begin seeing solidarity. We've spoken about what we want to start seeing. We've spoken about the historical and the current relationship between Africa and the diaspora as well. And so thank you, everybody. Today's conversation has just been, a beginning of the dialogue. And we will, of course, continue the dialogue at the ACA dialogue this coming Wednesday, the 28th. And so make sure that if you haven't already signed up for that, you can access that via the form on social media, or you can email team@africanclimatealliance.org. The data reimbursement form has just been put into the chat right now. As you all know, the rule around data I've communicated in the beginning, but if you haven't already read the rule around data or how to handle data with African Climate Alliance, please make sure that before you start saying, this and this and this and this, and I just filled out the data form, why don't I have data right this second? Read the instructions before you fill out the form. What if I was telling you that whenever you fill out the form, you owe me $3,000 and now you've signed the form? Read the terms and conditions, people. And so once again, there is the data reimbursement form for you to fill out. A massive thank you again to Laika for the contributions that she's added today. Whoop, 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 whoop. Absolutely adoring the contributions, sharing the knowledge and more. And once again, I've reposted Laika's initial conversational chat there, so you can see her email and her LinkedIn. Please go and give her some love, and ask some more important questions. More importantly, don't go and harass her. Then, if you want to learn more about Africa Matters Initiative, you're more than welcome to check them out at africamattersinitiative.com. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about today's session and more. I am really honored to have held space for some of this conversation. A reminder, I've spoken a little bit about it in the beginning, and we'll talk a lot more about it on Wednesday. But when we talk about climate justice, we don't just talk about environmental justice. We talk about economic justice and social justice too. And so when we talk about solidarity with Africa and the diaspora, it's important to acknowledge the relationship between social injustice as well and social justice movements as well. And so when we talk about Black Lives Matter in the US, we have to acknowledge that we as Africa have a role to play in solidarity there. When we talk about supporting those in Sudan suffering, we have to acknowledge our role there and the diaspora's role. We have to talk about our role, and this is where we start seeing the ecological crisis come in when we start talking about Sudan, but also when we talk about Congo and what we're seeing right now in the DRC. And so our solidarity must not only be limited to saving the whales or saving, the environmental side of things and solidarity within that front, but solidarity across all fronts. And so I truly just wanted to end on that topic so that as we go into conversation on Wednesday, we are able to kind of really flesh out the topics. Come with your questions, come prepared, and I wish you all a brilliant rest of your week for those who don't want to come, but otherwise enjoy the rest of your evening and see you all on Wednesday. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.